Hey guys, tonight we step softly onto a gravel path. The crunch beneath your sandals so gentle it sounds almost like whispers. The air is cool, laced with the faint aroma of pine needles and damp moss. A cicada hums in the distance, though you're not sure whether it's meant to calm you or drive you slightly mad. Ahead, a wooden gate creaks as you nudge it open, and suddenly you're no longer in the ordinary world. You're inside a medieval Japanese garden, one of those spaces designed to blur the line between nature and artifice, order and wildness, reality and dream. It's beautiful, yes, but also a little intimidating because you realize every single rock, lantern, and twist of a branch has been placed there with meaning. And if you're thinking, I can barely keep a cactus alive, how would I survive here? Don't worry, you probably wouldn't, but that's fine. Tonight, you're just here to drift, listen, and let the garden do all the work. You stand still for a moment, eyes adjusting to the balance of shade and sunlight. Unlike the sprawling wild forests of Japan, this garden is a crafted microcosm, a miniature universe squeezed into winding paths and still ponds. It isn't meant to impress with size, it's meant to impress with precision. Each lantern, each stepping stone, even the way the gravel crunches under your foot, has been arranged to guide not only your eyes, but your thoughts. It's like walking inside a philosophy textbook, except far prettier and with less homework. The medieval Japanese garden served as a gateway, literally and spiritually, for people of the time. Nobles, monks, and even the occasional warrior entered such spaces not just for leisure, but for shaping their day. Historians still argue whether gardens were primarily religious spaces or social ones, but the truth, like the twisting path you're on, probably winds somewhere between both. You'll discover soon that the garden is never just scenery. It's the stage for every ritual, big and small. You notice the gate itself, made of rough wood, weathered by centuries of rain and sun. It is not painted or polished. This is intentional. In fact, you'll soon learn that imperfections were celebrated here. A chipped lantern, a crooked tree, these were not flaws, but features. This was Wabi-sabi, the appreciation of beauty in imperfection, which, let's be honest, is a relief, because if you've ever tried to fold a fitted bedsheet, you know perfection is overrated. Walking farther in, you see that the garden is divided into zones, like chapters in a quiet book. To your left, a still pond mirrors the clouds, a place where nobles would stop and contemplate the passing of time. To your right, a shaded gravel courtyard awaits the patient rake of a gardener's hand. Straight ahead, a narrow bridge invites you toward an island planted with pines and irises. Each part of the garden has its role, much like cast members in a play, each stepping forward when the day demands it. You pause at the stepping stones, noticing how carefully they're arranged, not evenly spaced, but deliberately irregular. It forces you to slow down, to pay attention to your footing. And just like that, you've stumbled into your first lesson of the garden. Life isn't a sprint. It's a series of awkward little hops, sometimes a stumble, and hopefully a moment of balance at the end. Even samurai who carried more swords than common sense had to tread carefully here. As you continue, your sandals brush past moss that's soft as velvet, spreading in shadows where grass dares not grow. In medieval Japan, moss wasn't considered a nuisance, it was cherished. Gardeners would encourage it to spread, welcoming its aged, dreamlike look. Monks believed moss reflected the passage of time, the slow aging of both stone and soul. Which is poetic, yes, but it also means that medieval gardeners were the only people in history who looked at moss and thought, perfect, just what I needed. Already you sense the rhythm of the place. The air feels slower, the sounds more deliberate. A wooden water scoop leans against a basin by the path. You lift it, pour water over your hands, and the ritual of cleansing begins. In this garden, every action, washing, stepping, sitting, is slowed into ceremony. This is no casual stroll. This is your induction into a carefully curated world where daily life unfolds like a poem. You remember the gate behind you still standing open and realize that once you pass inside, you've left more than the outside world. You've left behind time as well. The medieval garden is a place where the day is not ruled by clocks, but by shadows, ripples, and blossoms. It is here that monks will meditate, nobles will gossip, poets will compose verses, and caretakers will quietly fuss over the placement of pebbles. And now you will, so. The stepping stones guide you deeper into the garden. Beyond the pond, you hear the faint trickle of water feeding into it, the lifeblood of the place. You don't know it yet, but tomorrow's morning rituals will begin right here, when the garden wakes up before you do, and its rhythms dictate the pace of everyone who enters. For now, though, it's enough to stand still, breathe in, and let the medieval air wrap around you like a soft blanket. The garden has accepted you, or at least it hasn't thrown you out, which, in medieval Japan, is a solid win. The light shifts, softening into gold as morning properly arrives. You find yourself drawn to the pond, its surface glassy except for the occasional ripple of a koi lazily disturbing the reflection of pines above. The fish drift in slow circles, as if they too have mastered the art of meditation. The nobles and monks who wander here begin their day by gathering along the pond's edge, not to gossip just yet, but to let the day ease into motion. You join them, lowering yourself to sit on a smooth stone worn flat by centuries of similar pauses. The pond isn't merely decoration, it's a carefully crafted symbol of purity and continuity. In medieval Japan, water represented the flow of time, endlessly moving yet always present. Some historians still argue whether the ponds were intended more for spiritual cleansing or for aesthetic pleasure. But the truth is that in practice, the two were inseparable. When you dip your fingers into the cool water, you feel that layered meaning instantly. It is refreshing, yes, but it also feels like an invitation to begin anew. The monks across the pond are already busy, though their busyness looks nothing like your modern to-do list. No phones, no emails, no reminders about overdue car insurance. Instead, their tasks involve feeding fish, sweeping fallen leaves, and whispering sutras that float across the water like incense. For them, every small act is an extension of devotion. Even the way a monk scatters food for the koi has a quiet, ritualistic weight, as though he's practicing mindfulness centuries before Silicon Valley made it trendy. Nearby, a noblewoman smooths her robe and adjusts her reflection in the pond's surface. Appearance mattered in these gardens. The mirrored water was more than vanity. It was a way to confirm that one's outer harmony matched the inner calm the garden demanded. You, of course, catch your reflection and wonder if your hair is sticking up at the back. The koi blink up at you in silent judgment. Morning chores unfold quietly, almost invisibly around you. A gardener kneels near the shore, pulling a single weed with the delicacy of a surgeon. In medieval Japan, to let weeds invade a pond's border would have been like leaving dirty dishes in the sink before guests arrived. Gardens were stages of reputation. Nobles judged one another by how crisp the gravel looked, how vibrant the irises stood in bloom, or how elegantly koi swirled beneath arched bridges. It was less about showing wealth than about proving refinement. There's a ritual here called Mizukagami, literally water mirror. Nobles and monks alike would lean over the pond, watching the surface until it stilled enough to reflect not just their faces, but their states of mind.
If the ripples showed restlessness, so too did the heart. You try it now, peering into the pond. The koi immediately ruined the effect by smacking the water surface, which feels about right. Your state of mind clearly is hungry fish. Historians still argue whether the daily gathering at the pond had a more practical element as well. Some point out that it served as a natural meeting place for nobles to exchange information before official court business began. In that sense, the pond was less a meditative retreat and more like a medieval Japanese water cooler, except instead of plastic cups and awkward small talk about sports, it was poetry, gossip, and reflections on cherry blossoms. You notice how the sun catches on the pond's edges, lighting up reeds and lilies. Each plant has been carefully chosen not only for beauty, but for symbolism. Irises represented heroism, lotus flowers, purity, and reeds, resilience. To sit here each morning wasn't just about admiring nature. It was about steeping yourself in subtle lessons. Nature lectured without words, which, to be honest, is the kind of school you could actually enjoy. Nearby, a servant pours water into a bamboo basin, letting it overflow and spill back into the pond in a rhythmic trickle. The sound is hypnotic. It becomes the heartbeat of the morning, steady and low, as if to remind you to breathe in time with the garden itself. Daily rituals here weren't meant to rush you into productivity, but to set a calm, balanced tone. Imagine if your modern mornings began this way, with koi and bamboo instead of burnt toast and honking traffic. The world might be a gentler place. One noble leans over and flicks the water with his fan, sending ripples racing outward. The koi scatter. A monk across the pond frowns slightly, which tells you that koi flicking is frowned upon in the ritual handbook. The noble shrugs, clearly unbothered, reminding you that even in spaces of serenity, people found ways to misbehave. The garden, for all its order, was still human territory. You rise, brushing dust from your robe, and realize that the pond is not just a beginning, but a threshold. To start the day here is to step into alignment with the rhythms of the garden itself. Soon, you'll follow the gardeners to the gravel paths where rakes turn sand into waves and order into meditation. But for now, the pond lingers in your mind, a mirror of calm, a stage of subtle politics, and, frankly, the world's most peaceful breakfast spot. The koi flick their tails once more, and the reflection of the sun trembles across the water. The day has officially begun.
The path curves away from the pond, carrying you toward a wide courtyard where pale gravel lies waiting, soft as powdered rice. At first glance, it looks plain, almost empty. But as you watch, a gardener steps into view, rake in hand, and the emptiness transforms. With each steady pull, the rake carves smooth lines, transforming blank gravel into waves that ripple across the earth. You stand there, mesmerized, realizing this isn't maintenance, it's meditation. The gardener moves slowly, each stroke deliberate, his posture almost ritualistic. You can hear the rake's faint whisper as it drags through the pebbles, a sound so gentle it could lull you to sleep if you weren't already entranced by the patterns forming before your eyes. Straight lines curve into circles. Arcs ripple outward like water after a stone drop. The entire courtyard becomes a canvas, and the gardener is both artist
and monk. Historians still argue whether this gravel art was meant to represent oceans or abstract concepts of infinity. But you don't need a textbook to feel the calm pressing down, steady and cool. You decide to try it yourself. The gardener hands you the rake, and immediately your wave looks less like the infinite ocean and more like a child's scribbles in the sandbox. Still, you keep at it, because here the point isn't perfection, it's presence. Every line is a reminder. Breathe in, draw a stroke. Breathe out. The fact that your circle looks like a misshapen potato, that's just part of the lesson. Zen monks used this practice to anchor their mornings, treating the act of raking gravel like prayer. It wasn't about lasting beauty. The next breeze or misplaced sandal would erase the patterns within hours. Instead, it was about impermanence, the fleeting nature of all things. It's basically medieval mindfulness, minus the $300 yoga mats. A noble strolls by, pausing to admire the design, and for a moment you feel oddly proud of your lopsided potato wave. He nods politely, though you suspect he's just being kind. In truth, the placement of each line was judged subtly, if not outright. Nobles used the patterns as reflections of their inner discipline. Messy lines, messy heart. Which means, according to your rake work, your soul is shaped like a lumpy turnip. There's a quirky tidbit you overhear from a gardener nearby. Sometimes, in the dead of night, stray cats would sprint across the gravel, ruining hours of delicate work. The next morning, monks would arrive to find paw prints scattered through their perfect waves. Did they scold the cats? No. They bowed to them. In Zen thought, those paw prints weren't flaws, but unexpected lessons, reminders that nature always has the final word. Cats, apparently, have been teaching us humility for centuries. The longer you stand watching the gravel shift into shape, the more you notice its power. The blankness becomes hypnotic, like staring at the surface of a still pond, but with the satisfaction of visible human touch. Samurai sometimes trained their minds here, standing for hours before a freshly raked courtyard, forcing themselves into patience. A battlefield required decisiveness, but also calm. The sand waves prepared them for both. You take another turn with the rake, and this time your lines wobble less. The rhythm gets into your bones. Pull, lift, step forward, breathe. Somewhere between your third and fourth circle, you realize you've stopped worrying about whether it looks good. That's when the real calm sneaks in, the kind that seeps under your skin. Suddenly, the gravel is not just sand, it's silence sculpted into form. The sun shifts higher, casting shadows across the courtyard. The patterns catch the light differently now, as if the garden itself participates in the art. This isn't static design. It's collaboration between human hands, natural light, and the inevitability of change. By evening, wind will blur it all. Tomorrow, another gardener will begin again. The cycle never ends, and yet each day feels new. A noble wanders past, glances at your progress, and offers the faintest smile. You feel a small surge of victory. Maybe your potato wave has matured into something resembling a ripple after all. Or maybe he's just amused at how seriously you're taking this. Either way,
you've stumbled into the heartbeat of the garden's philosophy. Life is raked, erased, and raked again. As you lean the rake back against the wall, you realize that the gravel courtyard has done its work on you, too. The noise in your head has quieted, replaced by the hum of patterns underfoot. Tomorrow's rituals will bring tea and pines, poetry and subtle drama. But for now, you walk away from the sand waves, carrying the strange piece of imperfect lines in your chest.
The gravel fades behind you, and now the path bends toward a cluster of tall pines, their needles whispering in the breeze. Nestled among them is a modest wooden pavilion, its sliding doors thrown open to the morning air. Inside, you smell roasted tea leaves and hear the soft clink of cups. Here, the ritual of tea unfolds, equal parts refreshment, meditation, and, let's be honest, a little bit of performance. You slip off your sandals at the pavilion's steps and step inside, the floorboards cool beneath your feet. A low table waits, surrounded by cushions, while a kettle simmers gently on a brazier. The host moves slowly, as though time has thickened, each gesture deliberate. Scoop, whisk, pour. It isn't just making tea, it's a choreography, a silent play, where every move carries centuries of meaning. Historians still argue whether these medieval tea gatherings were more spiritual discipline or social stagecraft. But as the earthy fragrance fills your lungs, you stop caring. You're just grateful it isn't instant coffee. The placement of the pines outside matters. Their branches stretch low, filtering sunlight, so the pavilion feels secluded, half hidden from the world. In medieval Japan, gardens were arranged so that tea pavilions seemed discovered rather than built. You had to stumble upon them, like finding a secret tucked between trees. This design wasn't just aesthetics, it shaped mood. By the time you entered, your mind was already softened, ready to focus on the simplicity of a steaming bowl. The tea itself is thick, bitter, and green. You take a sip and try not to grimace. A noble sitting across from you hides a smile. This is part of the charm. The tea isn't supposed to be delicious in a modern latte syrup sense. It's supposed to ground you, to remind you of earth and leaves, of effort and stillness. You can almost hear a monk chuckling in your head. It's not Starbucks. It's enlightenment. There's a quirky tidbit about these gatherings. Sometimes nobles would stage subtle competitions, not about the tea itself, but about the utensils. A prized tea bowl, passed down for generations, could earn as much admiration as a painting or a sword. Guests would murmur about the glaze, the curve, the way the bowl sat in the host's hands. In fact, some lords used tea gatherings as political weapons, showing off rare ceramics as proof of wealth and influence. Forget sports cars. In medieval Japan, clout came in the shape of a perfectly fired clay bowl. You sit back, noticing how conversation flows as gently as the steam rising from the cups. Nobody rushes, pauses are embraced, silences stretched. In a culture where poetry was everyday currency, words were chosen carefully. A noble might lean forward, comment on the way the pine needles scatter light, and just like that, a new poem might be born. The tea pavilion wasn't only for sipping, it was a stage for verse, where blossoms and breezes became metaphors on the spot. Outside, a gardener sweeps fallen pine needles from the path, each stroke of his broom echoing the soft whisk of the tea. It's as if the garden itself participates in the ritual, maintaining its own rhythm. You take another sip, and this time, the bitterness doesn't feel harsh. It feels grounding, like gravel patterns or koi ripples. It's a reminder to slow down,
to taste the moment without rushing to sweeten it. The nobles around you adjust their robes, their sleeves trailing like waves across the tatami. A breeze nudges the paper doors and sunlight flickers inside. For a heartbeat, you could believe you're part of a painting. Historians still debate whether tea was primarily about communion with nature or communion with society. But sitting here, it's clear that both are true. You're drinking not just with the people beside you, but with the garden itself, the pines outside acting as quiet companions. At the end of the ritual, the host bows, then carefully wipes the utensils, placing them back with a reverence usually reserved for relics. The guests rise slowly, as if breaking the spell would be rude. You step outside again, blinking against the brightness, the taste of earth still lingering on your tongue. The pines sway, framing the pavilion behind you, a reminder that even something as simple as tea can become a world-shaping daily ritual when given space and attention. You glance back one more time before following the path onward. The pavilion looks even smaller now, almost vanishing among the trees, as if it was never really there. And maybe that's the point. Rituals here are fleeting, just like ripples in gravel or reflections in water. They leave impressions, not in permanence, but in the quiet memory of having been.
The path carries you onward, past the tea pavilion and deeper into the garden's unfolding story. Here the air feels sweeter, tinged with the perfume of blossoms. Ahead, the world suddenly opens into a riot of color, petals spilling across branches, drifting like confetti into streams, settling on moss as if the garden has decided to dress itself up for company. You've arrived at the flowered heart of the place, where seasonal blooms dictate not just beauty, but the daily rituals of fashion, poetry, and even courtly gossip. A noblewoman pauses beneath a cherry tree, tilting her head as pale pink petals drift onto her sleeve. She doesn't brush them away. Instead, she admires the accident, because here in medieval Japan, blossoms were not just flowers, they were signals, metaphors, and conversation starters. You quickly learn that no season passed unnoticed in this garden. The blossoms told you what to wear, what to write, and sometimes even what to whisper about your neighbors. Cherry blossoms, or sakura, reign supreme in spring. Their fragile petals fall within days of blooming, a reminder of life's fleeting nature. Monks would gather under the trees for reflection, nobles for poetry contests, and commoners, when loud, for festivals. Historians still argue whether cherry blossoms were more about religious contemplation or about aristocratic display. But standing here beneath the soft shower of petals, you feel the answer might be both. It's hard not to think deep thoughts when the entire sky is snowing pink. You notice that your robe is suddenly inadequate for the company. The noblewoman nearby adjusts hers, dyed in hues carefully chosen to echo the season. Pale pinks for cherry time, deep reds for chrysanthemums in autumn, whites for irises in early summer. Fashion here wasn't dictated by royal decrees alone. It was guided by the garden. Imagine your wardrobe today being chosen not by trends or influencers, but by whatever flower happened to bloom outside your window. You'd save money, sure, but you might also get weird looks if you wore dandelion chic to the office. The blossoms even shaped conversation. A poet sitting cross-legged under a plum tree scratches ink onto paper, muttering lines that compare falling petals to passing youth. Another noble smirks, suggesting perhaps the poet is just feeling old. Gossip flowed in these gardens as easily as streams, carried by petals. If someone wore the wrong seasonal color, it became instant material for whispers. Did you see her wearing chrysanthemum yellow in spring? Scandalous. Honestly, medieval Japanese high society would have thrived on social media. And then there are the chrysanthemums, imperial symbols, favored in autumn. Their layered petals mirrored the layers of courtly life, complicated, precise, and not always easy to navigate. Irises, meanwhile, often line streams and ponds, their sharp leaves thought to ward off evil. You catch a gardener adjusting their stems so they lean just so into the water. It looks casual, but you know by now that nothing in this garden is left to chance. Here's a quirky tidbit. Nobles sometimes plucked blossoms to press into poems, literally attaching a flower to a written verse before sending it to a friend or rival. Imagine getting a letter today with an actual flower taped inside, the equivalent of someone sending a text with a perfectly chosen emoji, but more fragrant and likely to wilt before delivery. As you wander, you realize the blossoms are not just background scenery, they are timekeepers. Each season's arrival shifted the garden's rituals. Spring cherry blossom viewings, summer iris contemplations, autumn chrysanthemum poetry contests, winter plum meditations. The garden wasn't a static design, it was a living calendar. Every step you take reminds you that time here isn't measured by clocks, but by petals drifting through the air. You pause at a plum tree, its blossoms fragrant and strong against the chill. Unlike the delicate sakura, plum blooms are resilient, appearing in late winter as harbingers of spring. They were admired for their stubbornness, their ability to thrive against frost. Samurai favored them as symbols of endurance. Standing beneath one, you inhale the crisp scent and feel the quiet strength it radiates. If cherry blossoms teach impermanence, plum blossoms teach perseverance. Two sides of the same daily lesson, carried by petals. As you move on, a petal lands in your hair. A passing noble chuckles softly, saying it means the season has chosen you as its companion. Whether that's good luck or just a polite way of saying you've got something in your hair, you can't be sure. Either way, you carry the petal with you, letting it cling as a small emblem of your morning in bloom. The blossoms thin as the path curves back towards bridges and islands, but their presence lingers in your senses, their scent, their colors, the way they whispered about life's brevity. Soon you'll step onto stone bridges that carry deeper meanings, but for now, you carry the lesson of petals, that every day, even the most ordinary, can arrive dressed in blossoms if you only pause to notice them.
The path bends again, and suddenly you're standing before a small wooden bridge that arches gracefully over a narrow stream. Its curve is so steep, it feels like a challenge. Do you cross carefully, or do you tumble into the water with all the dignity of a startled duck? The bridge glistens with morning dew, its planks smooth from centuries of sandals. As you place your foot on the first step, you realize that this bridge isn't just a practical crossing. It's a passage filled with layers of meaning as intentional as the placement of every pine needle around it. The stream beneath you reflects shards of sky, broken only by the slow drift of koi or the shimmer of iris leaves. On the far side, a small island waits, crowned with moss-covered stones. This is no random landscaping choice. In medieval Japan, bridges and islands acted as symbolic geography, tiny models of the universe folded into garden space. Historians still argue whether the islands represented mythical realms, Buddhist teachings, or simply scenic variety. But the truth is that they worked on all those levels at once. You weren't just walking across water, you were walking between worlds. As you reach the center of the bridge, you pause to take in the view. The stream curves just so, drawing your gaze toward another lantern half hidden in bamboo. Gardeners designed these perspectives carefully. Angles, reflections, even the way light struck the water at specific times of day. Cross a bridge, and suddenly you've been nudged into a new way of seeing the garden. It's less a stroll and more a guided meditation disguised as sightseeing. On one of the islands, you notice a cluster of carefully placed stones. They aren't lined up neatly or randomly scattered. They're arranged in 3s and 5s, evoking mountains, shorelines, or even sacred sites.
You think back to the raked gravel you saw earlier, where patterns symbolized waves. Here, stones serve as mountains, tiny peaks rising out of the water. The whole scene is a condensed landscape, a miniature world that you can wander without ever leaving the garden. It's the medieval version of world building, long before fantasy novels made it cool. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some bridges were deliberately built at odd angles, even zigzagging. The belief was that evil spirits could only travel in straight lines. By forcing visitors to step left and right, the bridge not only offered new scenic views, but also acted as a spiritual defense system. It's basically medieval garden security. Forget cameras, just confuse the demons with bad urban planning. As you continue across, you hear the faint slap of water against stone. A servant nearby drops petals into the stream, letting them float lazily under the bridge. This act, too, has its place. Streams and gardens often hosted floating cup rituals, where wine cups were set adrift and participants had to compose poems before the cup reached them. Fail to write in time, and you drank as penalty. In other words, a combination of poetry slam and drinking game, probably a hit at noble gatherings. You imagine cups drifting under this very bridge centuries ago, carrying verses about blossoms, moons, and the occasional thinly veiled jab at a rival. From the far end, a nobleman pauses, fanning himself with deliberate grace. He lingers on the bridge, because standing here implied thoughtfulness. To be seen gazing into the water was to suggest your soul was equally deep. Of course, some probably just liked the excuse to people-watch from a good vantage point. The garden symbols gave cover for all sorts of human quirks. Crossing to the island, your sandals press into mossy ground, soft and springy underfoot. The stones here rise like teeth from the earth, some tall and slender, others squat and rounded. They are meant to look natural, but the placement is deliberate, each stone chosen for shape, shadow, and balance. Gardeners treated rocks like actors. No stone appeared without a role. Imagine auditioning a rock, deciding it was too smug, and tossing it aside. That level of detail shaped daily life because every step through the garden was meant to remind you of cosmic order. Standing on the island, you glance back across the bridge. Its arch looks different from this angle, a perfect silhouette against the sky. That's the trick. Bridges and islands weren't only for crossing, they were for framing the garden itself, turning it into a series of living pictures. By stepping forward, you step into the artwork, and by stepping back, you see yourself framed in it too. The water laps gently, reflecting the arch and your shadow. You realize that even something as simple as walking across a bridge became part of daily ritual here, an action layered with meaning, beauty, and a quiet reminder that every crossing is symbolic. Today, it's a stream in a garden. Tomorrow, perhaps, it's the passage of a lifetime. Either way, you've made it across with your dignity intact, which is always worth celebrating.
The island path narrows until it carries you beside a trickling stream. Here, the mood shifts again. Not quite solemn, not quite playful, but something in between. A group of children sits cross-legged near the water, their brushes and paper spread out on low wooden boards. Their voices rise in bursts of laughter, then fall to hushed concentration. You've wandered into one of the garden's lesser-known functions. It was a classroom, a place where young nobles learned lessons that blended Confucian philosophy, poetry, and occasionally light-hearted games. You crouch nearby, watching a boy dip his brush into ink, his small hands trembling as he tries to form neat characters. His tutor, a stern-looking scholar with the patience of a saint, corrects his posture with the tap of a fan. Every stroke of the brush matters, not only for the words themselves, but for the discipline they teach.
The boy sighs, clearly wishing he could chase dragonflies instead, but he presses on. Historians still argue whether these garden lessons were primarily about education or about instilling etiquette. But either way, the garden was as much a classroom as any hall lined with scrolls. Beside them, another group of children floats tiny wooden cups down the stream. This is the Kyokusui no En ritual, originally a pastime of adults, now repurposed for learning. Each child must catch a drifting cup before it passes and compose a short poem in response to a theme. Today's theme seems to be blossoms, and the results range from the profound, petals fall like time itself, to the adorably unrefined. Flowers are pink, and so is my sleeve. When one boy fumbles the cup and it floats out of reach, the others cheer and force him to drink plain water as a penalty, laughing at his grimace. You can't help but smile. This might be the earliest form of peer pressure poetry club. The tutor explains to the children how gardens themselves are teachers. A plum blossom shows resilience. A raked gravel wave shows impermanence. Even koi, circling lazily, teach patience. The children nod, though one girl is more interested in poking the koi with her brush handle. She earns a sharp glare and quickly withdraws. This tug-of-war between focus and distraction feels timeless. You've seen the same look on a modern teacher's face when a student starts doodling superheroes in the margin. Here's a quirky tidbit. Sometimes noble families hired poets or monks to teach children directly in the garden, believing the natural setting improved memory. The sound of running water, the sight of blossoms, these were thought to embed lessons deeper into the mind. Whether that actually worked is debatable, but the result was a generation of aristocrats who could casually drop a 30-line poem into conversation like it was small talk. Imagine being 10 years old and already pressured to rhyme better than your cousin. No wonder some of them turned to the sword instead. One boy recites his freshly inked poem, standing proudly on a stepping stone as though it's a stage. His classmates clap politely, though one mutters under his breath about recycling last week's line. Rivalry sprouted early here, and the garden offered the perfect arena, safe, beautiful, and full of metaphors ripe for competitive use. You begin to understand how such training shaped not only poets, but also diplomats and politicians. If you could win with a verse, you could probably win with a treaty. Meanwhile, the tutor draws the children's attention to a small waterfall nearby. He explains how Confucian philosophy saw flowing water as the model of virtue, always moving, never stagnant, finding its way around obstacles without losing purity. The children lean forward, eye wide, though one is clearly plotting how to splash his sister. The lesson continues anyway, the tutor's voice rising above their giggles. Gardens like this weren't just playgrounds, they were moral landscapes, classrooms of stone, water, and bloom. As the lesson winds down, the children pack up their brushes, some smudging ink across their robes in the process. Their laughter drifts across the water as they run ahead toward another part of the garden. You stay behind for a moment, noticing how their voices blend with the rustle of leaves and the flow of the stream. The garden has been many things so far: sanctuary, canvas, tea house, but now you see it clearly as a teacher too, shaping minds in ways a dusty lecture hall never could. A final petal drifts past on the water, carrying away the last of the poems. You wonder what lessons it has absorbed and where it might end up, perhaps snagged on a rock, perhaps swept to the pond beyond. Like the children, it moves forward, carrying its story into the wider garden. And so do you.
The children's laughter fades behind you as the path straightens into a quieter stretch. Here, the mood feels heavier, as if the air itself has settled into contemplation. Ahead, a group of men in layered robes kneels before a minimalist stone arrangement. The scene is stark. No flowers, no koi, just flat ground, raked gravel, and carefully positioned rocks. The samurai sit motionless, their swords resting at their sides, eyes locked on stones that look deceptively simple. You realize you've stepped into another kind of classroom, one where stillness is the lesson and the students carry blades instead of brushes. You kneel nearby, folding your legs under you, and attempt to copy their silence. The rocks sit at odd angles, some tall, some squat, arranged in such a way that from any one vantage point, at least one stone is hidden. It's deliberate, a reminder that no single perspective reveals the whole truth. Historians still argue whether these stone gardens were primarily religious tools or practical training for warriors, but for the samurai, they became exercises in mental clarity. Stare at a rock long enough, and maybe you'll learn patience, or at least stop thinking about your overdue rice taxes. The leader of the group speaks softly, reminding his students that discipline of the mind is as vital as discipline of the sword. The stones, he says, are like battles, solid, unmovable, inevitable. The gravel waves around them, however, represent change. To focus on both is to balance steadiness with adaptability. You nod, pretending you understood that immediately, though privately you're still trying to decide if one of the rocks looks like a turtle. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Zen gardens were intentionally designed to frustrate viewers. Patterns that never quite lined up, rocks that seemed off-center. It was all meant to unsettle, to push the mind out of lazy comfort. A samurai who fidgeted or grew restless during meditation revealed a lack of discipline. In other words, a garden could humiliate you without ever lifting a finger. Medieval Japan, come for the blossoms, stay for the existential crisis. The samurai remains still for what feels like forever. You shift slightly, your foot going numb, and instantly a warrior beside you notices. His eyebrow twitches in the universal language of rookie mistake. You sit straighter, trying to pretend you're perfectly fine, even as pins and needles march up your leg. The irony is not lost on you. The lesson is patience, and you're failing it spectacularly. Slowly, though, something shifts. The longer you stare at the stones, the more they stop being just stones. Shadows play across their surfaces as clouds drift above, making them appear alive, breathing even. The raked gravel ripples in neat arcs, like frozen waves, and your mind begins to settle into their rhythm. Time stretches. You forget the numbness in your leg, the whispering pines behind you. For a few breaths, you fall into the stillness completely. And then, just as suddenly, a crow caws overhead, snapping everyone out of their trance. One samurai chuckles under his breath, breaking the silence. The leader doesn't scold him. He simply points out that even distraction is part of the lesson. The world intrudes, and the mind must learn to remain calm. You file that away, grateful for the excuse to wiggle your toes again. The practice continues with a walking meditation. The samurai rise and slowly circle the stones, each step measured, each gaze deliberate. They bow slightly as they pass, acknowledging the rocks as teachers. You join them, awkwardly at first, but soon the rhythm makes sense. Step, breathe, step, breathe. The garden becomes a mirror, reflecting not just the stones, but your own impatience, your own fleeting calm. It's humbling, but also oddly soothing. One warrior leans toward you as you walk,
and murmurs that even great generals once trained this way. To face chaos, you must first face silence. You imagine armored men who once led armies, now sitting cross-legged, glaring at gravel like it held the secrets of the universe. In a way, maybe it did. By the time the meditation ends, the sun has shifted again, stretching the shadows of the stones into long fingers. The samurai bow deeply, thanking the garden as if it were a master in its own right. You follow their lead, clumsy but sincere. The stones, unmoved, offer no reply, yet their silence feels like an answer all the same. You leave the courtyard quieter than you entered, carrying a stillness that clings to your skin. Ahead, the faint murmur of water reaches your ears, promising the next lesson. The garden has tested your patience with silence. Now it will teach you how sound itself can become ritual.
The hush of stones gives way to something livelier. The sound of water, rushing and tumbling as if the garden itself has decided to clear its throat. You follow the path toward a small ravine where water spills down dark rocks, forming a waterfall no higher than a man, but powerful enough to fill the air with its music. Mist clings to your sleeves as you draw closer, the droplets sparkling in the sunlight. You realize immediately that this waterfall isn't here by accident. It shapes the mood, the rituals, even the meals of those who live around it. You sit on a mossy stone near the edge, letting the spray cool your face. The monks here use the waterfall as a backdrop for chanting, their voices weaving with the constant rush of water. The result is hypnotic, as if nature itself is harmonizing with prayer. Historians still argue whether waterfalls in medieval gardens were primarily spiritual focal points or simply aesthetic flourishes. But you can tell they were woven into daily life no matter the intent. For monks, the sound became a metronome of devotion. For nobles, it became the soundtrack to poetry, banquets, and evening strolls. A servant approaches the water's edge, filling a jar with the clear flow. This water will be used for cooking rice at the evening meal, a tradition rooted in the belief that fresh running water carried purity into the body. Imagine swapping your tap water for a mini cascade in the backyard. Suddenly, dinner feels a lot more ceremonial. You picture someone today trying to cook ramen noodles with authentic waterfall water and realize the monks were way ahead of the wellness trend. The waterfall also serves a practical ritual, cleansing. Samurai, before important duels or decisions, sometimes stood beneath the cascade, letting the icy water pound their shoulders. The practice was thought to purify the spirit, but it also probably just numbed their anxieties into submission. You step forward to test the spray with your hand and instantly regret it. Frigid, shocking, like plunging into a bucket of ice. If you had to stand under the whole thing, you'd emerge purified, yes, but also possibly blue. Here's a quirky tidbit. Noble banquets were often timed to coincide with the sound of water. A small cascade might be positioned so that its rhythm matched the pace of serving courses. Too slow, and guests grew restless. Too fast, and conversation felt rushed. A well-placed waterfall could set the entire tempo of an evening, like a natural conductor. You wonder if the cook ever asked the gardener to turn down the waterfall a notch. A noblewoman steps onto a platform near the water, lifting her sleeves to recite a poem.
She compares the falling stream to silver threads unraveling from the sky. Her audience nods in approval, some scribbling verses of their own. The waterfall doesn't just provide inspiration, it provides competition. Who can capture its essence best? Who can turn liquid into words that flow just as smoothly? These poetic duels were less cutthroat than sword fights, but the reputations at stake were no less serious. The monks return, their chanting shifting into silence. They bow toward the cascade, acknowledging it as teacher and companion. You follow suit, dipping your head slightly. The waterfall roars on, oblivious to your gesture, but somehow it feels right. Daily life here was shaped by rhythms like this, moments when natural elements weren't just backdrop, but active participants in the rituals of the day. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over you. At first, it's chaotic, a rush without order, but slowly your ears tune into patterns, steady beats, subtle shifts in pitch as the water strikes different rocks. It's not just noise, it's a symphony of repetition, endlessly varied, endlessly the same. For people in medieval Japan, this wasn't just pleasant sound. It was a reminder of life's constancy and change all at once. When you finally rise, your robe damp at the hem, the waterfall feels less like a feature of the garden and more like a voice within it, one that speaks constantly, without pause, shaping the pace of prayer, meal, and meditation. Ahead, lanterns begin to glow faintly in the gathering dusk, promising the garden's next transformation. The day that began with koi and blossoms now slides quietly toward evening, lit not by sun, but by fire.
The sun dips low, and shadows stretch across the moss. Just as you think the garden might dissolve into darkness, tiny sparks of light begin to flicker along the path. Lanterns, stone, wood, and paper glow softly, their light more amber than white, as though the garden itself has decided to breathe with fire instead of air. You follow their trail, each pool of light guiding you into a twilight world where daily rituals soften into something slower, gentler, and just a little more magical. A servant kneels to adjust a stone lantern, carefully lighting its oil wick. These lanterns weren't randomly scattered. Each was placed with the same precision as rocks and bridges, intended to highlight specific views. Some illuminate moss banks, others cast rippling shadows on water, and a few glow just enough to frame a pavilion in silhouette. Historians still argue whether the lanterns were primarily practical tools or symbolic beacons, but it's clear they shaped the rhythms of evening life in the garden. Without them, dusk would simply mean go inside. With them, night became a stage. You step closer to one lantern, tracing your fingers along its cool carved stone. Its design mimics a pagoda, tiered and elegant, like a miniature temple, holding just enough flame to keep the dark at bay. The flame inside trembles as the breeze shifts, sending shadows dancing across the ground. For a moment, you're convinced the shadows themselves are part of the ritual, invited to swirl as companions in the gathering night. Voices rise nearby, soft and playful. Nobles gather in a pavilion, surrounded by glowing lanterns, sipping sake and exchanging stories. The lantern light flatters everyone, smoothing lines, softening robes, turning each face into a portrait framed by fire. Conversation drifts from blossoms to politics to gentle gossip, but always cushioned by laughter. A poet recites a verse comparing the lantern glow to fireflies trapped in stone.
Another noble jokingly complains that at least fireflies don't require so much oil. Everyone chuckles, because even in medieval Japan, fuel costs were a thing. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some noble families hired attendants whose sole duty was to maintain evening lanterns, ensuring they never sputtered out during gatherings. To let one die mid-banquet was considered bad form, almost an insult to the guests. So, yes, imagine your entire career being professional candle babysitter. It sounds silly now, but in a society where ritual meant everything, that little flame carried enormous weight. You wander further, the lanterns guiding you like breadcrumbs. The gravel path gleams faintly, raked lines catching the light in rippling patterns that look like frozen moonlight. You remembered the samurai meditating on stones earlier, and now the lanterns reveal another layer of meaning, the same patterns, but transformed by fire. Even in darkness, the garden refuses to sleep. A group of musicians gathers on a low veranda, plucking strings and tacking drums in rhythms as gentle as the lantern glow. Their music drifts through the air, mingling with the faint scent of pine smoke and sake. Nobles sway slightly to the sound, some humming, some closing their eyes, letting the night carry them. You sit among them, the lantern beside you flickering against your sleeve, and for a moment you feel folded into the fabric of their evening, one thread among many, stitched by firelight. Historians still debate whether these lantern-lit gatherings were primarily social events or subtle political maneuvers. After all, what better way to impress rivals than by hosting a garden that glowed like a dream after sundown? But sitting here, you sense that the truth was gentler. The lanterns allowed people to linger in the garden after dark, to continue rituals of poetry, music, and companionship without fear of stumbling into a koi pond. They extended the day just enough to make the night feel like a gift, not a curtain call. As the evening deepens, lanterns are added one by one until the garden seems to float on a sea of trembling stars. The air cools, sleeves rustle, cups clink, and laughter rises again. You tilt your head back, noticing how the lantern glow mirrors the constellations beginning to pierce the sky. Earth and heaven, reflection and reality, the garden keeps weaving them together, even as night claims its space. You rise from the pavilion, walking slowly down the lantern-lit path. Each step feels cushioned, softened, almost suspended in amber light. Ahead, a wide platform awaits, perfectly positioned to catch the silver face of the moon as it climbs above the pines. Lanterns have guided you here, carrying you through dusk toward the next ritual. Night in the garden is not an ending, but a transformation.